I want you to move from overwhelmed by information to confident in what really matters. I want to help you move from being unsure towards direction and purpose in your healthcare. I want to introduce you to health experts. I want to let you in on tough conversations on women's health. I want to give you a place where you can lean in and learn how to take care of yourself. Let's transform your health. Let's get clear on your goals. This is Women's Health Unplugged. I'm your host, Dr. Jordan Robertson, naturopathic doctor. Is breakfast the most important meal of the day? Welcome to another episode of Women's Health Unplugged. This is a solo discussion with me. I'm Dr. Jordan Robertson, a naturopathic doctor in Ontario, Canada, serving women all over the province to support their hormonal health from fertility to PMS to menopause. And I want to talk today about breakfast. I want to talk about this phenomenon that I see in the women that I work with that has led them to really de-emphasize the importance of this meal in the day. And I want to give you some tools to maybe reflect on your own diet at this moment and think about whether or not it deserves a change and if we need to put more emphasis on this particular meal in your life. So when we look at nutrition, and we've talked about nutrition a lot on the podcast, we've talked about things like protein needs. We've talked about things like, the impact that restriction and dieting have on female hormonal health. You can go back and listen to some of those specific episodes because I'm going to pull from some of that conversation into us talking today about the importance of breakfast, because it does start to borrow some of those ideas about other hormonal challenges we see with women with respect to their nutrition and the impact that, essentially when we're talking about nutrition, there is a ripple effect in one choice that you make into all of the other choices that you make. And sometimes when we talk about nutrition, we talk about these individual microscopic bullet points in your diet without thinking about how those choices do or don't impact the rest of your day. And the decision to have breakfast and or the decision about what to eat for breakfast is no different than that. It's not as simple as I'm just not going to have that meal or I'm going to have X for this meal. The things that you do or don't do in that early morning mealtime will influence the rest of your day. I mean, it might influence it in a positive way, but what we're going to spend some time on today is focusing on some of the negative things that happen when women don't eat breakfast. So I want to first of all start by talking about the most common concern that I work with when women approach me in their office, and it's usually fatigue. So regardless of the reason women think they're coming, when I ask them, how would you know if you felt better? Or what does feeling good feel like? They often say, I wish I just had more energy. I just wish I had more energy through the day. And second to that, they comment on their mood, right? They say, I wish I just felt happier through the whole day. I wish that I didn't feel like I had no patience for my family at the end of the day. So if we look deeply at both of those things, right, fatigue, and then I'm going to say mood regulation through the day, there has to be an impact on your fueling on both of those things. And I always use the example when I'm talking to my patients. I say, we'd never let Serena Williams go to work on an empty stomach, right? Imagine she would have to go to work with an empty stomach. And what would her day turn out like if we sent her to work on an empty stomach? And you'd say, well, she probably would be tired, right? She probably wouldn't perform as well as she normally does. She probably would be slower to react. She probably wouldn't be as sharp. She might even get grumpy, right? If she had to go to work without any food in her stomach. And yet for some reason, so many women don't view themselves in that way. We're not maybe using our bodies in the same way that Serena Williams does when she goes to work, but there is some level of performance that's required of you when you take on your day. And doing that on an empty stomach, you're going to perhaps see some of the same outcomes we would expect to see if Serena went to work without any breakfast. And I'm here for today's conversation to be, let's break down this myth that women don't need to eat anything in the morning. I want you to really examine how you feel, and let's look deeply into the idea that maybe fueling differently through the day could actually change the way you feel through the day. So, one of the challenges that we have when we just straight up take out a meal. So, let's talk about fasting first and some of the negative impacts of just straight up taking the meal out. Now, the majority of research that's done on fasting is done on a diseased population, meaning that we're talking about patients who have straight up diabetes or have some sort of metabolic disease where weight loss is the penultimate goal to help them overcome their disease. Right? These are not just people who want to lose weight because they want to lose weight. These are people who need to lose weight for an outcome with the disease that they have. The majority of the research is done in those people, and the majority of those studies are done in men. And I've talked before on the podcast with some guests about the impact that fasting, and we call it energy restriction, which is generally just under eating, what impact that has on women and their hormones. But if we just take the meal out, okay, what are some of the other ripple effects that happen if that meal just straight up is lost? And one of the things that we notice is that women have a hard time meeting their protein needs if one of the meals of the day is absent. So generally, when we're talking about supporting our muscle mass, supporting our bone health, women need to eat about 30 grams of protein at each meal, give or take, depending on her body size. And if we take that full breakfast away, we're now expecting lunch and dinner to make up the difference in protein intake that we lost by not having that first morning meal. When you take out a meal, you're having to make up that nutrition elsewhere in the day. And so it shows up the most, I would say, with protein, because that's such a difficult macronutrient for women to meet their needs on a regular basis. So even our breakfast eaters still underfuel on protein a lot of the time. But it does happen with other nutrients, right? So if you imagine about what your calcium needs are through the day, if you imagine what your fiber needs are through the day, if you imagine what your, vitamin B6 needs are through the day, if we eliminate a third of your eating for the day, we're expecting you to make up those nutritional needs later, and you're likely not going to do that. Now, when we're talking just about caloric intake, women see this as a brilliant and easy way to decrease their calories just by eliminating a meal. But even when women are dieting, some of their nutritional needs stay the same, right? Your protein needs stay almost exactly the same when you're dieting, even when you are choosing to decrease your food intake throughout the day. Your protein needs stay the same, as do many of your other like essential needs as far as nutrition goes. So when we just, full take out a meal, it's really difficult for women to make up that difference later in the day. Now, many women don't eat a particularly nutritious breakfast. So when they look at their breakfast sandwich from the drive-through or their piece of toast with peanut butter, they don't see that as a nutritional loss, right? To get rid of that food. And so that may be another problem, right? That breakfast has not been well thought out and is nutritionally not that sound. And so when you're looking at your like one hard-boiled egg, you can easily see that like getting rid of that is not making that big of a deal. But the deeper problem there is that those breakfasts themselves are not particularly nutritious. But I want to start just by saying that when we take out one meal of the day, a third of your eating time is gone. It's really difficult to catch those nutrients up later in the day. A simple way to try and track that is just to literally track your protein intake through the day and see if you come close to meeting those needs. It's pretty difficult for women to hit their needs with just 2 meal times. Then there is some conversation about what happens if we just stuff all of our protein into one meal. We think we probably can absorb 40, 50 grams maybe in one sitting, but it's harder to absorb more than that. And I would say just culturally, we don't typically have a meal that like on our plate that meets, 80% of our protein needs in one meal. That's not really culturally what we would typically choose. And so even if we could absorb 100% of our protein needs at dinner, no one's going to make that meal. And so I will argue that if you've taken breakfast out, you probably are not only protein deficient, but probably deficient in a few other nutrients as well. But where we see it show up in the mood and in the fatigue, which is kind of how we started the episode, is by taking out that protein. That's the one that women will have the biggest influence on the way that they feel through the day. That's the nutrient that you're going to notice the difference the most. The other thing that happens when we take out that meal is that we are shifting our energy intake to later in the day. Now, there's lots of discussion in the literature and science around energy balance and the influence what happens when we shift when people eat, right? And sometimes just that rule of only eat between these hours appears on the surface level to do positive things for women, right? Only eat between 12 and 7 p.m. And what does that do, right? Well, they skip breakfast. But what else does that do? I mean, maybe that eliminates their eating on the couch after dinner. So at surface level, that may appear like a very positive thing for people to just squish their eating into a very small eating window. However, doing that for not every woman thrives when we have her start eating later in the day. And some of that comes from the influence that satiety has on your future eating through the day. So what I mean by that is satiety is that feeling in your body when you've eaten and you're happy and you feel full. And satiety is built by multiple parts of our diet, right? So our nutrition influences our satiety. The foods that we choose to eat influence our satiety, which is why if you eat like a muffin at 7 o'clock in the morning, you probably want a second muffin at 7:45 in the morning, right? That's not particularly satiating, even if it's kind of got some energy in it, it has calories in it, maybe has a little bit of fiber in it, but we actually get hungry relatively quickly after having that type of food. Whereas if you ate the similar equivalent amount of chicken breast, you actually would be fuller longer. So biochemically, there are changes to how full we feel based on the types of foods that we eat. And when we choose higher protein foods, we actually build satiety in ourselves, meaning that we're less likely to have sort of food-seeking behavior. We feel better, calmer, in our appetite because our bodies and our brains feel more satisfied by the foods that we've eaten. And when we look at like overall energy intake through the day, when women delay their first meal of the day, for some women, that means that they can't actually build the satiety they need to not overeat later in the day. So the solution they have to minimizing their food intake with fasting, or maybe they're not even thinking about it that way and they just skip breakfast because they're not hungry or because they don't see the value in having breakfast or they don't have time to have breakfast, but they actually have a hard time kind of turning off the floodgates of hunger later in the day because they're missing some of those nutrients that are related to satiety. And we call it like backloading their day, meaning that if you delay your major food intake until later in the afternoon, you're not going to build that level of satiation by the time you hit dinner. And then you eat dinner and then you want something after dinner. So this missing of that early morning meal means that you catch up with fueling later in the day. And often when we're really hungry or we're not satisfied, the food choices that we make are not quite as sound, right? No one goes, I'm dying of hunger. I'm going to have a chicken breast and some broccoli, right? We don't actually have the capability of making those types of nutritional choices when, the wheels fall off the bus, the floodgates open, and we need to eat something. And so the same woman who says she's not hungry in the morning is the same woman who says she's not full after dinner and she's going to eat again after dinner. And those choices are not always maybe as nutritionally sound. And so what I always want her to do is kind of like hold her day out at 6 feet in front of her and say like, let's look at this a little bit more critically. Are we sure that skipping breakfast is actually supporting you? Right? If we look at like the overall roadmap of your day nutritionally, not eating early in the day is leading to, I'm going to call it overfueling later in the day or having difficulty navigating your nutrition later in the day. And sometimes when women get into that like vicious cycle of not eating in the morning and eating a lot at night, they actually skip breakfast the following morning because they feel bad about their eating the previous evening, right? And they think, well, I had those chocolate chips and popcorn before bed last night, so I'm not going to have breakfast this morning. And it actually keeps them in that vicious cycle of energy balance being sort of tilted towards eating more of your food later in the day rather than eating a more balanced amount of food throughout the day. So that's 2 points so far. So one is when you take out breakfast, you're missing, it's really difficult to catch up on nutrition, meaning that there's some basic needs you have that if you scrap a third of your meal times for the day, you're not going to hit your targets for that. But the second being that when we do that, right, and we delay our eating to later in the day, or perhaps our breakfast is not nutritionally that sound, thinking about the women who eat the toast crusts off of her kid's plate and then goes to work with just some coffee in her stomach, that doesn't build satiety in the day. And therefore, those women, the ones that get home from work and kill a bag of salt and vinegar chips while they're making dinner and then eat again after dinner, and it's because that satiety is not built early enough in the day. There's lots of evidence around what happens when we change the timing of meals for women and for people and the influence that it has on blood sugar. Not everybody has the same biological clock through the day, and not everybody benefits from delayed eating in the day. Some people actually benefit from earlier eating in the day. And so there's some evidence looking at, we call it chronotype with nutrition, meaning that people need to eat earlier in the day in order to have the best metabolic effect in their body. So if they eat later in the day, they're more insulin resistant and they have greater difficulty with blood sugar management. There's also evidence that the more times we eat in the day, the better our blood sugar balance ends up being. So we have less of an insulin and blood sugar spike with the second meal that we have during the day versus the first. And when patients delay that first meal of the day, that they actually don't benefit from what we call that sort of second meal effect as far as their blood sugar being better balanced through the day. So going back to our woman, right, our tired and moody woman, you can see how that delay of that first meal, or maybe a non-nutritionally sound meal of the first meal of the day, may actually be setting her up for struggling with her fatigue and her mood later in the day, right? She's not fueling for performance. She's going to work on an empty stomach. Think of Serena Williams. And she's also having a hard time meeting her nutritional needs. So maybe in that one day, she doesn't necessarily feel the effects, right? So one day of skipping out on your protein, you may not notice the difference. But months into skipping out on some of your protein that you need, that definitely starts to accumulate as fatigue. Sometimes women will make changes to their nutrition, like going more plant-based, and take some of the protein out of her diet. And she doesn't notice the difference right away. She may even feel quite good right away because she's including lots of new healthy foods. But 4 to 6 months into a plant-based protein deficient diet, women will walk through our door with fatigue being their most, significant symptom. And we can see it's because she's really meeting sort of the bare minimums as far as protein intake goes. So it's an insidious onset as far as the fatigue is when it comes to protein. But you can see day to day that when women sort of under fuel during the day, they're asking a lot of their brains and bodies with an empty gas tank. And that's not really the way that our bodies sort of thrive. So what should you choose for breakfast, right? So I know you're listening to this and you're like, okay, Jordan, I'm like half in on your argument about why I should eat breakfast, but I don't want to eat breakfast, or I don't like breakfast foods, or the foods I would choose are not going to meet any of those needs that you just said. So how do you choose a breakfast that actually supports you in your nutrition journey? So number one, like the idea of breakfast food is made up, right? You can eat whatever you want for breakfast. Some of my patients who are the most successful with their nutrition are more creative with the foods that they eat for their morning mealtime because they do it to meet their nutrition needs. That said, we probably culturally have certain foods that we're more likely to gravitate towards in the morning. But how you build that morning meal should really be a reflection of like what your nutritional needs are through the day, and do we need to accomplish some of that in a first morning meal? And how does it set you up so that the rest of your day can sort of fit with what your nutrition needs actually are? So, for example, I love eating dinner with my family. I never want to change what my choices are during the day in order to, or I never want to change what my choices are at dinner, I should say, because I like to eat what my family eats every night. I would say that in times when I have personally struggled the most with my nutrition, maybe when I was cutting weight for a weightlifting competition or something, is when I've had to like intentionally not eat my family's meal for like 12 weeks in a row. That's when I've sort of struggled the most with my nutrition. So the way that I balance that and knowing that my husband makes dinner some of the time and he likes to use lots of oil in his cooking. That sometimes my family will eat a less lean cut of meat because my kids will like, a less lean cut of meat, meaning that like they like meatballs and things that maybe have a higher saturated fat content than what is like maybe ideal for my nutrition. And so I will choose a breakfast that meets some of my nutrition needs, but also allows me to meet my cultural needs through like later in the day. So when someone looks at my breakfast, they would say, well, Jordan, that's a really like low fat breakfast. Why would you not have more fat in your breakfast? And the truth is that I eat that breakfast that way to meet my own personal nutrition needs, but also allow me to have freedom and flexibility in my eating later in the day so that I can eat whatever I want with my family for dinner. So that's one way that you can think about what your breakfast needs should look like. One is there a nutritional need that you need to hit? And most women need 20 to 30 grams of protein in their breakfast in order to meet their needs for the rest of the day. Now, if you catch up later with a protein shake, or if you catch up later because you have a high protein snack, then maybe your breakfast could get away with a little bit less protein. But you can't have an egg, right? An egg is 6 grams of protein. You can't just have peanut butter, right? Which is like 3 or 4 grams of protein. If you're going to have protein at breakfast, it needs to be a sizable serving. Half a cup of cottage cheese, 3/4 of a cup of Greek yogurt, 3 or 4 eggs or eggs topped up with egg whites, a protein shake with 1 to 2 scoops of protein powder. Or you can always eat chicken. You could have chicken for breakfast or some equivalent that's going to give you that 20 to 30 grams of protein, or at least not set you up for some level of deficiency later in the day. Of course, we want to get in some fiber, and it's lovely if you can get some servings of fruits and vegetables in the day as well. When we look at our total needs for the day of fruit and vegetable servings being somewhere in that like 8 to 10 servings range, similar to the protein conversation, you're going to have a hard time catching up if you don't include some of that in your morning meal. I choose at least 1 serving of berries in that morning meal, and that's probably where my fruit and vegetable intake stops in the morning. But I do a smoothie to make up for that later in the day that has 4 or 5 servings of fruits or vegetables in it. So I know personally that I catch up later in the day. But if you have a hard time with your fruits and vegetables, having 2 servings of vegetables in your omelet, having 2 to 3 servings of fruits and vegetables in your smoothie, having a bowl of fruit with your breakfast, putting some fruit in your cottage cheese or yogurt. These are ways that you can help yourself achieve some of those nutrition goals earlier in the day. It helps you hit those fiber goals. It helps you hit the antioxidant goals that we have for you through the day. So when you think about some of the sort of take-home steps I want you to start to put into practice, one of them is I want you to map out what your total day looks like as far as your nutrition goes and look pretty critically at the role that your morning meal is having on your energy, on your mood, and on your overall nutritional intake through the day. It should be an equal contributor to your fueling for the day. It should not be this, passed off, last minute grab and go kind of meal, because it's not setting you up for the kind of day that you're hoping to have, right? I imagine it's like, when you get gung ho on a Monday morning and you really want to make a change, your breakfast is that opportunity kind of every day to sort of set the day off on the right foot, right? Like every breakfast is like your proverbial Monday morning where you want to get started with lots of energy and actually set yourself up for success later in the day. So, but that critical look of what you are doing is important. I'll say to women often, it's nice that you have a solution right now, right? So if they say, well, I'm fasting, or I skip breakfast, or I do my workouts fasted in the morning. I'm like, that's great that you've got some ideas around how you want to, structure your nutrition. Are you sure that it's not creating other problems? Right? And sometimes when we see sort of a flashy, sexy rule or offering that's maybe going to give us this like special prize, right? If you follow this fasting, it will help you with weight loss, right? I would say that's maybe one of the more common reasons that women have chosen to do some fasting, or it's like happening by accident, right? And women haven't really given it a ton of thought. I want you to have more intention around the way that you build your day, right? It's if we're dragging it out of bed, if we're grabbing something quick, having a couple of cups of coffee on an empty stomach, and then I always use salt and vinegar chips as my example. I'm not sure why, but then plowing through your salt and vinegar chips at 4 o'clock every day. That doing that once it will never hurt anybody, right? And I can see those days coming from a mile away where I didn't eat enough, didn't take enough to work. And I know as I'm driving home, I'm like, I'm going to kill that box of crackers when I get home for sure. You can see it coming, but it's that reflection on what is happening that I think is the most important. Your actions are influencing the way that you feel. The way that you build your day nutritionally is having an impact on your mood, and it's having an impact on your fatigue, straight up. So if either of those two have crept into your life, take a step back and look critically at what's going on. And almost even if you needed to imagine it was someone else's diet and look at her, right? Look at that person, that woman, look at what she does during the day and how she fuels herself. And then ask yourself, like, do I understand why she's tired? Do I see why she's moody? And then think about what strategies you could put into place that may shift that so that you don't have that experience. Right. So doing it once never hurt anybody. And with nutrition in general, like I always say, it's never one cupcake that like makes or breaks anybody's health plan, nor is it one green smoothie. It's the repetitive action of any behavior that actually produces the results in one way or another, the positive results or the negative results. So if by, Thursday afternoon there is nothing left to eat in the house and salt and vinegar chips is it, it's fine. But when it's a daily occurrence or a repetitive behavior, that's where we see it start to show up more consistently and having a greater impact on your overall health. So we need to break that pattern, right? We need to break that pattern where breakfast is the afterthought, where breakfast is the the meal that nobody likes. That's the pattern that needs to be broken. And I will say when you start to make breakfast or you start to prioritize that meal, you are not going to be good at it at the beginning. And the morning is maybe where time matters the most, right? There is a lot going on in the morning. There are a lot of meals to be thought of and made. We sleep in because we're not feeling great. Morning is where people are the least tolerant of clumsy habits. So, what I mean by clumsy habits is as we're trying to build new habits, you are going to suck at them. You're going to fumble around your kitchen. You're going to put the wrong amount of fluid in your smoothie and have to top it up and add a little more liquid. You're going to not have the right spatula clean because you left it in the sink from the night before, or maybe that's just me. It's going to be clumsy. You're not going to have it down. If you take your lunch or breakfast to work with you, you're not going to have the right container for it, or the lids and the thing are not going to be matched. It's going to take you time when you start. You're going to be clumsy at the new habit, but you need to be tolerant of that learning in order for you to get to a place where it's smooth. So I can make my breakfast and my lunch in less than 10 minutes. And I cook oatmeal every day. I make a smoothie. I have a lunch that's not always comprised of leftovers. It's not like I'm always just taking a container out of the fridge. But I also have taken my lunch and breakfast to work every single day for about 6 years. So I'm really good at it. I have lots of containers. The containers mostly get emptied and cleaned, usually by my husband. And I have all of these structures in place. There is always the frozen stuff in the freezer. There's always the protein powder I need in the cupboard. Those things are there on routine because I practiced them, not because they magically just showed up overnight. And when we start to eat breakfast in the morning, or women say, I'm going to change my pattern of behavior and it's going to include 20 to 30 grams of protein in the morning, the first 2 weeks are rough. Okay? You're going to make the smoothie with blueberries and banana and soy milk and protein powder. And on day 4, when you run out of blueberries, you're going to go, well, shit, now I don't know what to do. Right? It takes the repetitive action of the behavior for you to realize that last Sunday you needed to buy more blueberries, or that you could swap out some frozen strawberries that you have as an SOS in the freezer. It takes time for you to build that habit. But that's where people are the least tolerant of, fumbling around, is in the morning, right? Time is so valuable in the morning that if the smoothie takes longer than people expect, they quit. Or if the Tupperware containers and the lids and all the things like we can't find, we quit. So when you start to examine what your day looks like and how you're going to restructure your nutrition to include some food in the morning, you need to build in some tolerance for how clumsy it's going to feel at the beginning. Okay? Because it's only when we persevere through that window of time where things are not that smooth, we're not that capable, we've made some mistakes, we run out of the groceries before we're supposed to. I need you to persist through those uncomfortable periods of time to get to the place of comfort. So if you only make breakfast once a week and you make eggs, of course, it's a long, drawn out, annoying process that you would never dream of how you would fit that in on a day where you needed to be at work, at your desk at 9, ready to go, right? You'd be like, well, I can't make eggs. It's too slow. But the more that you practiced it, the faster you would get, or you would start to see those like workarounds in your life so that you can create better flow for yourself in the morning. So if we have a stir fry the night before, some of those vegetables can go in an omelet the following day, right? It may help for you to do overnight oats or something where it's half prepped the morning of. You may have 2 versions of this high protein breakfast, the one where you do have time to make something and the one where you don't have time to make something. But you need to be able to be tolerant of those changes in your day so that you can actually get to a place of mastery in making breakfast, because that's some of the challenges that women have in making meals for themselves is that they don't know what to have. They've devalued the importance of it, and they're clumsy in the kitchen. And all of those things only get better with intent, right? So intentional thinking about your nutrition and what you need to put in a day in order for you to feel well. Comes with planning. There you need 2 cello containers of blueberries, or we need a big bag of frozen ones that live in the freezer. So they're always there to help you, right? I call that infrastructure. You need infrastructure in your kitchen, and you need to prioritize it. You need to say, I want to feel better, and I can see this is a gap in my day, and I'm not going to tolerate the pattern of ignoring my breakfast any longer. And so your tolerance for feeling shitty has to go down, and your tolerance for feeling clumsy in your kitchen has to go up for 3 weeks, right? You need to lean into it for 3 weeks. So that's what I want you to take home from today's episode is I want you to think a little bit more critically about that morning meal. And maybe you're highly successful at eating breakfast, but it's cereal, right? It's cold cereal. Let's look at some ways that we can make that 20 or 30 grams of protein. And even if it starts with a simple swap of swapping in some soy milk, putting some Greek yogurt on it. I know that's you probably imagine that to be gross, but I'm just thinking of ways for you to get 20 grams of protein in your cold cereal breakfast you already do. Add some pumpkin seeds, right? Have a side of a smoothie. Or you scrap the cereal altogether and do something that is a higher protein, more impactful nutritional punch for your breakfast. If you already eat breakfast and you're on routine, try 3 to 4 days a week achieving something that is a little bit more nutritionally sound than what you already do. So is breakfast the most important meal of the day for women? I would argue that it probably is. When we think about what we need women to do in their day, the amount of performance and requirements we have for them to manage the big responsibilities, the big emotions, they've got a lot on their plate. Women have a lot on their plate. And I need something to go on their plate in the morning in order for them to feel well enough to do that. We all have the proverbial Serena Williams day, right? We all have that day. I want you to fuel yourself to be able to perform in that day, that you can show up like a boss in your day. And you can't do that on an empty stomach. You can't do that with being calorically in a deficit. You can't do that if month over month you've restricted your protein intake by taking that one meal out of the day. And you can't do that if we've deprioritized your health to the point of not having a meal. Maybe that's this one last little thing I'll leave you with is, if you imagine that you don't have time in your day to feed yourself, I think that's a much bigger conversation of where you and your health is lying on the grand scheme totem pole of your family's structure, of your own personal structure, and how you've thought about where your health lies in the importance of your day. If you don't have enough time to fuel yourself, something else has to go, because that's not a sustainable way to take care of yourself. And that's not the way that we help you show up best in the world. I hope you enjoyed that episode of Women's Health Unplugged. My goal is to help you feel more confident about your health. Please remember that what we talked about today in the podcast does not constitute medical advice, nor was a doctor-patient relationship formed. If you have questions about your healthcare or about how today's topic pertains to you, please take it up with your family doctor, your specialist, or someone on your health team.